Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Caitlin Weiler, and I work for the Northwestern Alumni Association. We're going to begin shortly, and I'm so pleased that Professor Carter Cass could join us for the webinar. But first, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items before we dive in. If you have any questions now or during the presentation that you would like to ask, please feel free to use the Ask Your Question box on the bottom of your webinar dashboard. Just type in your question and hit send. We'll be pausing throughout the presentation to answer questions, so no need to wait until the end to submit your questions. I'll be keeping an eye on those and jumping in to ask Professor Cass the questions as we go. Should you have any technical issues during the webinar, please feel free to close out the Zoom window and restart using the same registration link from your email, or you can refresh your browser. Oftentimes, the issues are Wi-Fi related. Lastly, a link to the recording of this webinar will be sent to all registrants after the talk. Now let's introduce Carter. Professor Carter Cass is the Michael S. and Mary Sue Shannon Clinical Professor of Entrepreneurship at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management and an operating partner at Pritzker Private Capital. A former CEO of Walmart.com, founding CMO of Blue Nile, and director of marketing at Frito-Lay. Cass has led and launched iconic consumer brands and digital businesses. He serves on the boards of Kellanova, PLZ Corp, Heartland, and Monogram Foods, and is the author of The Right and Wrong Stuff: How Brilliant Careers Are Made and Unmade, named by Forbes among the best self-help books of 2018. He holds degrees from Stanford University and Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. And with that, I'm going to hand it over. Thanks so much for being here, Carter.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin, and welcome everybody. So I was thinking, where's a good place to start on this? And why would I, who's, a business, a kind of a practitioner, why would I write a book? Uh, the reason is there are a couple occurrences that made me get curious about a topic. I was trying to find an old boss of mine. I hadn't talked to him for over a decade. And I finally found him through the power of the internet, and I had a real nice catch-up conversation with him. When we got to the career part, and I asked him, what he was doing and how he was doing in his career, the temperature dropped. He kind of hemmed and hawed, and he was clearly not as I don't know, hadn't accomplished what he thought he would, and certainly what I thought he would, having been my old boss and being very bright with big fancy degrees. Um, we hung up the phone, and I wrote on a sticky note, what impedes the progress of talented people? And I put it on my right here on my wall. And I just every once in a while I'd look at it for the next month. And then finally I went to the dean, Sally Blount at the time, the dean of Kellogg, and said, "Hey, could I take a quarter off from teaching to do some research on a topic that's sort of kind of gnawing at me? Why do good people, talented people, have career derailment events? I mean, what happens?" And she thought it was an interesting topic because you don't read about managerial and leadership failure, you always read about success. So anyway, the research turned into, I just found so much rich information that it turned into a book very naturally. So I'm going to share with you what my top five findings are in terms of why talented people derail. Now, I also took a look, and I will the last 10 or 15 minutes, what do high potential high performers do differently in their careers. So I was trying to do a little bit of a balance and make it not totally a downer session. So with that in mind, let's get into it. I'll pause after some of these major topic transitions and I'll take some questions through Caitlin. So first of all, when I say derail, what do I mean? I'm talking in the terminology I used when I did this research, and I did a lot of research. For about 3 years, I interviewed people. I did a whole lot of secondary research. I did 100 people surveys of people that got fired or demoted, but I'm trying to understand what happened to them. But finally, I realized I had to sort of narrow my definition of derailment, and I came up with when talented people, I looked at people that had the capability from their HR department or from their boss to move up one or two levels or more. What happened to those talented people when they did not reach their expected level of achievement and they were either fired, demoted, or they flatlined? So, in other words, the trajectory that was expected based on their perceived ability was not met. What happened to them? That's my definition. What I found, first of all, in the research is this is not a niche topic at all. Half to two-thirds of us will have a derailment event in their career. I am a card-carrying derailment member. And age 33, I got smacked upside the head for being obstinate and recalcitrant and was kicked off of a team, demoted, and had to work my way out of the doghouse for several years in my early to mid 30s due to, I'd like to say it's due to being individualistic, but it's it's probably more like having hubris. So, it happens. And I'll talk about some of the remedies as I go through this presentation. But this is data from three different sources. Quantitatively, over half of us will have a derailment event where we'll either get fired, demoted, or we will be told we're non-promotable. So why do talented people derail? What happens to them? What causes this? I found five reasons. Now there's more than five reasons, but I found five that over and over I experienced as I interviewed people who derailed, as I talked to executive recruiters, as I talked to heads of HR, as I talked to CEOs. I found five reasons, five themes, and we're going to go over each one of them. Now, before I do it, let me just say that the topic can be kind of grim, right? So what I did was I tried to sort of lighten it up by creating these characterizations of why people derail. So you'll see these archetypes that try to lighten up what can be considered a grim topic. So let's talk about the five. This is people with the wrong stuff. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about high potential, high performers, people with the right stuff, and we'll look at what they do. So, wrong stuff. Number one reason, period of the five, is people that have interpersonal issues like this man, Captain Fantastic, here on the right-hand side. You can see him, he's about ready to slay people and dragons at the same time. He's uh, he's insensitive. He's self-promoting to a fault. He's arrogant. He's overly ambitious, and he bruises you with his sharp elbows on his quest for the holy grail of the corner office. So, two things worth noting here. This poor guy has relational issues. He has problems because he is not empathetic enough. He doesn't connect with people. He doesn't listen well. He's too self-serving. Now, let's say you look at this, and I see Caitlin looking at it, and Caitlin says, "That's not me. I don't suffer from that." Very good. I'm glad. But pay attention to that box at the bottom, dark side personality traits. It's very, very Jungian, right? So what do I mean by that? All of us under pressure have certain tendencies that can impede our effectiveness. So a woman named Karen Horney, let me stop for a second before I get into Karen Horney. The problem in understanding our dark side traits is that most of us don't have a lot of self-awareness, even though we think we do. We think this woman named Tasha Urich wrote a book called Insight a few years ago. And she said that in doing a meta study of 5,000 people, 90% of the people said they were self-aware. And then she gave them this research, and she found that between 10 and 15% actually were self-aware. Why this huge disparity between perceived self-awareness levels and actual self-awareness levels? It's because she found that there's two types of self-awareness, and most of us don't have both of these combined. One is internal self-awareness. Do you understand what your values, your strengths, your weaknesses? Do you have a good understanding of yourself? But there's another one that comes along with it, which is, how is your external self-awareness? What is the extent to which you understand how you're coming across to other people? So, in my case, when I was demoted in my 30s, I suffered from poor external self-awareness. I didn't realize the effect I was having on others because my radar wasn't very good at picking up on other people's, reactions to my performative nature, I would say at the time. So wanting to think about both of these is really important. Now, let's talk about Karen Horney. So when I talked about this sort of dark side tendencies, Karen Horney is a German psychotherapist in the around 1920 to 1950. And she did a lot of really good clinical work and wrote some wonderful books. And one of her books, she examined everyday common neuroses we have to stressful situations. This is when these dark side tendencies pop out. So she found we do three things under stress that create interpersonal issues. One is we try to move away from the stressor. We detach, we become skeptics, we become distrustful. We try to move away. Another strategy we do that hurts our effectiveness interpersonally under stress is we move against the problem. We try to make it go away by being forceful. We're aggressive, we're manipulative, we're bold. We try to kind of like, oh, we try to make it go away like that. And then the third is we move towards the problem by being compliant, ingratiating, overly pleasing, etc. These three tendencies hurt our interpersonal effectiveness, and we do this under pressure. So then a man named Robert Hogan created something in the 90s called the Hogan, this is like 50 years later, the Hogan Development Survey, which took Karen Horney's three platform areas, moving away, moving against, and moving towards. And out of that, he created 11 tendencies, and I listed nine here. 11 tendencies. For example, one that I didn't miss is excitable. So these 11 tendencies are things we do that hurt our interpersonal effectiveness under stress. And here's the killer. The Hogan's self-assessment is used so much that there's been over 1 million observations at this point. I've taken it twice when I wrote my book. And 98% of us have at least two of these traits. He has 11. The chances that you're not going to have spike somewhat in one of these 11 is virtually nil. I've counseled entrepreneurs who have 8 of these 11. They spike in 8. Many people have 4 or 5 of these tendencies. The problem isn't, do you have a tendency? You will. The problem is when we don't know about our tendency, so we can't have the self-awareness to improve it, to mitigate its impact. So what can you do in this situation? You try to get as much feedback as possible, informally and formal 360 feedback. You try to get as much feedback right after a big moment so you can make adjustments along the way. You don't want to wait till the end of your yearly annual performance review to have these kind of conversations. It's too late. A lot of times, if you're counseling people, they don't even remember the infraction because it was 6 months ago. Right after the event, right after a presentation, right after a big meeting, right after a piece of analysis, talk to people and then do it really productively. Here's one of my favorite little tools. This is the world's simplest feedback method, and I learned this from a Kellogg professor colleague of mine, Craig Wortman. Goes like this. Let's say Caitlin just gave a big presentation, and I'm her supervisor. After the room is cleared, I say to Caitlin, what's one thing, Caitlin, you think went well in there? And I zip it. I shut up and listen, and I don't disagree. I don't agree. I just nod. I let her speak. Then after that, I say, Caitlin, here's one thing I think went well in there. Maybe the same thing she said, maybe something different. These first two steps build confidence and get people warmed up, ready to talk. Then I'll say, Caitlin, what's one thing you do differently in there? Not 5 things, not 3. We're just going to focus on one. And I let her speak. I don't disagree. I don't cut in. And when she's done, I'll say, Caitlin, here's one thing I think you could have done differently. I think you could have had a summary that brought together the points at the very end. So, went well, went well. Do differently, do differently, and you're done. Think how much better we'd all be in terms of our self-awareness on the job is if we got real-time feedback from our boss or our friends right after the event when everything's fresh. So we love this little method so much that up and down the halls of Kellogg, where I am today, we use this, a group of professors. I'll ask someone to sit in on one of my lectures. Maybe it's something new that I haven't done before. And then as I'm walking out, we'll say, quick feedback. Did well, do differently, and on we go. The key is to focus. Only pick one thing, maybe two, so that it sticks and people can work on it. So that is the end of the first section, which is interpersonal issues driven by lack of awareness and often under pressure, how we behave. And the best thing you can do is get feedback. Caitlin, I have time for a couple questions if you want before we get into the next derailer.
Perfect. We have exactly two. So to go back to kind of the very beginning of your slides, someone was asking, do the derailment stats that you shared include the massive downsizings that we're seeing now or not?
The information does not include what has happened and is happening as a result of AI. So remember, there's a difference between getting laid off and derailing. You can you can get laid off because they're downsizing, but it isn't a personal derailment event. So I would sort of separate those two. If it was a layoff, Amazon laid off 14,000 people just last year, end of last year, that might not be a derailment event. It might, somebody's career has clearly derailed, but it's not for the personal reasons that we're looking at. It was due to an outside force. So what I looked at here was when somebody's career was moving up in a direction and then it stopped. What happened? That was the agency upon them. It was it wasn't that they got laid off because of the economy. What did they do to lead to their derailment? That's what I looked at. And those numbers between 50 and 62% have been fairly steady for some time.
Great, that's helpful to kind of differentiate
Yeah.
the focus. And then the other question was when you mention a person not reaching their expected potential, whose expectations is this referring to? For example, some people overestimate their abilities or their talents and have higher expectations maybe of where they should be or where they're heading, which could be wildly different than what maybe other people's expectations are of them.
I looked at either, that's a good question. I looked at either what the boss's expectations were or what the HR, what was in their HR, game plan. So I'm a manager. It was believed when we looked at my development, I could make it not only to senior manager, but to director level. And then I was told I was unpromotable as a manager. That would be an example of that. So it's sort of the collection of what was perceived to be the person's upside, not only by them, but by their boss or by the HR person who was working with them on their development plan.
Got it. We do have a few more questions, but you let me know if you want to dive back in and we can
Let
try and
me
save them
keep
for the
go.
end.
Let me keep
Okay, good.
going, and then if I want to make sure we get through the material, if we have time at the end, I'd love to keep taking these questions. So hold on to them. Second reason, this is the solo flyer. This is somebody who is a very good performer. They do so well that they get promoted. By the way, this happens earlier in career. The interpersonal issues, Captain Fantastic, usually happens mid-career when the job gets more complex and they need enlistment from others and other people don't want to work with them. This happens early on. Here's a great quote from an executive coach I know. She said, fabulous performers get a team and still behave like all the ideas have to come from them. This is somebody who is so used to being effective, they keep wanting to do it themselves because they know if they do it, it'll get done right. Problem is, they alone aren't scalable, are they? They micromanage, first of all. Secondly, they don't spend enough time developing their people. They don't they don't do a good job of putting together development plans, coaching up their team. They dole out tasks instead of teaching them to fish. They try to fish for the team. And then the third thing that I found they did when I came up with this derailment tendency is really interestingly, they don't do a good job managing context. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a woman named Linda Hill who wrote a book that's an ethnographic look called Becoming a Manager. She's a Harvard professor. She studied ethnographically 19 people who just got promoted from individual contributors to managers, and she noted how they behaved. And she found out that one of the things they didn't do well was they didn't realize how much of their job was about connecting to their peers, connecting to the other constituents that they have to get work done through, and making sure they're aligned. They don't manage the context well. So, a key remedy for people suffering would be for this person on your team that just gets promoted into a management job. Yes, they have to be ready to let go. They have to train up their people, but they also have to realize that half their time is spent just making sure that the bridges are built between their department and other departments. Here's an example. Let's say the person we're talking to is a newly minted merchandise manager at Walmart. I worked at Walmart for 6 years. Let's say we're talking about a merchandise buyer. They just got promoted. They have to not only develop their people and oversee the work of the people, they also have to make sure that the priorities of the department are aligned with the priorities of the key departments that they work with. So in other words, here they are in the middle in the blue. That merchandise manager has to understand what the marketing programs are. That's going to affect how much they buy of a certain product type. They have to understand, they have to work with finance to make sure it's priced right for profitability. They have to make sure that they understand logistics, what's going on. Is the product, has it arrived from Asia yet? Is it in the DCs? Where is it? And they have to work with probably the .com team to make sure that the website is accurately reflecting the products they're selling. So you can see in this simple case, this merchandise manager, it's not just about managing the team and developing the team. It's also about aligning with the key constituents that allow the department to be successful. And young managers that derailed did not understand that half the job of this person is cross-functional alignment. Let's go through one more and then I'll pause again. The third reason I found for sharp, talented people derailing in their careers, I've called version 1.0. This is somebody that has difficulty adapting to change. They have trouble adapting to changing circumstances. What are some changing circumstances? They get a new boss and they have trouble working under them. That's exactly what happened to me when I derailed. My old boss was hands off and very encouraging. And then I got a new boss who was super hands on and fairly nitpicky. And I did not respond well to that. That was my fault. I didn't adapt to the changing circumstances of having a new boss with a different style. It's incumbent upon me to understand how to do that, not the boss. So changing circumstance, new boss, new strategy, new organizational design. And of course, what is changing right now in front of our very eyes that this version 1.0 better figure out? AI. They have to figure out how to use technology to their advantage or they're going to be left behind. So underneath all of this, the problem with version 1.0 is basically lacking in curiosity, not figuring out, realizing that just because they're competent now doesn't mean they're going to be competent later. They have to keep growing and learning in the job. So one of the things I would say as a remedy to this poor fellow, You can see him with his abacus and his protractor and his MS-DOS computer. I would say you have to work on your learning agility. So when you hear the word learning agility, what do I mean? Looking at different research, five components are often mentioned when you talk about do you have learning agility? One is the person self-aware? Do they understand what they have to learn? Where they need to have learning agility? What areas do they have gaps that they have to work on? Second, are they open-minded? Are they flexible? Are they flexible thinkers who can take feedback in? Third, are they reflective? Do they sit back and think, how could I have done that better? What did I learn from that experience? How can I apply it to new experiences? Are they reflective? Fourth, are they proactive? Do they get on top of issues as they're emerging so they don't get to be big issues? And then lastly, probably the mother lode, do they have good discovery skills? Now, what do I mean by discovery skills? When I say discovery skills, I mean the skills you use to keep expanding and growing as you develop in your career. Here's five examples of discovery skills. One is good people that have high learning agility ask a lot of questions. They ask a lot of questions like, how might we? What if? And those questions allow them to continue to grow. They are wonderful at asking good questions. I had 3 meetings with Steve Jobs when I was CEO of Walmart.com. And, I'd heard how tough he could be and, you know, bombastic and all this stuff. I'll tell you, when I met with him, he asked better questions than just about anybody in the room. He tried to really understand Walmart so he could be effective in dealing with us. So my experience with him was a lot different than some of the things I've read. Secondly, observational skills. They love people that are high in learning agility, love to figure out what the customer is experiencing. What job is the customer trying to get done? And what is impeding their ability to get that job done? Good observational skills. Third, experimentation skills. People that have high discovery skills love experimenting because they know the best way they can learn is by trying things. So you think of Thomas Edison. He said, I haven't failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that don't work. He's famous for saying that. My sister reported to Jeff Bezos. She got to Amazon in 1995 and worked there till 2020. So she saw the thing go through all these changes. And so I asked her one time over dinner, what about Bezos was the most impressive? Or kind of what's the secret sauce of Jeff Bezos, Jen? And she said, he was the master experimenter. He tested everything. He took nothing for granted. He was always setting up A/B tests. He was always building prototypes and testing the prototypes. He was always in market with a test because he knew the best way we can learn was by in-field testing. Fourth, networking. People that have high discovery skills have a powerful network of people that get them smart in areas that they aren't smart. So I would ask you rhetorically, who are your counselors on AI? Who are your counselors on industry trends in the industry you're interested in? Who is your high-speed network of advisors that help you? And then lastly is sort of the mother lode of discovery skills, which is sort of the synthesis of all of it is your associational thinking skills. Associational thinking is when you can take diverse things and see how they might fit together, drawing connection between things. It's kind of Reese's peanut butter and chocolate combined. Einstein once said, creativity is nothing more than combinatorial play. So, discovery skills, the key to learning agility. Now, let me stop before I get into the fourth derailer and see if there's some questions from the second two.
Yes, we have a few more, although some of them are going back to the first derailer, if
That's
you're okay
okay.
with that.
I'll take a
Um,
couple.
Great. So one is, what if you don't agree with the feedback that you received? Maybe when you're going through that feedback model that you mentioned.
Am I the one giving? Let's assume I'm the one at the receiving end of the feedback.
Yes.
I I would ask, stay in that learning mindset. If you don't agree with it, say, Caitlin, thank you for the feedback. I appreciate you taking the time to give it to me because I know there's other things you can do with your time. I know the feedback's a gift. Can you explain the comment you made? Because I'm still not clear on how that applies to what I did. So just try to stay open-minded and continuing to understand their point of view. That's the thing I'd say that's most important. Then if you disagree with it, you could either say, again, thank you for the feedback. I'm still having trouble understanding, how that applies to me. And you could delve into it. The thing I think that people make the biggest mistake on is when they disagree with the feedback, what do? We get defensive. If you can try to stay open, there's probably a good chance, that you'll understand the nature of their feedback and find some gem of application or truth in it.
That makes sense. And then another question, many leaders or high potential and high performers are not interested in larger leadership roles these days. How do you factor this into the discussion of derailment? And was this a part of your study at all?
Yeah, it's interesting. This next one sort of addresses that. Um, when I did this study, I was looking at people that wanted to rise up through an organization. There are some people, like my wife, who get to be an expert in something and then they don't rise up, they just practice what they do very well. So, for example, um, my wife's a trust and estates attorney. So her job is not about rising up as much as practicing effectively. So some of the things that I would say here that are about sort of organizational growth might not apply to her as much, but there's still a lot in here on personal development and on her being effective with her customers that I think she could probably take with her. But as I go into this one, you'll see what I mean. The fourth reason for derailment I found was people that are considered non-strategic. I call them the one-trick pony. They are really good at one thing and they bump up against a ceiling because they're considered an expert in that area, but they don't know enough about other things to get promoted. So they run into a ceiling. Now, in some cases, if you're a surgeon or if you're an anesthesiologist or if you're a trust and estates attorney, your job is to get good at one thing, very good at it. So this one might not apply to you as much. If you're trying to move up an organization, though, and you're trying to broaden your responsibility set, this probably applies, which is, do you have an overdependence on one skill? And are you deficient in one skill that's needed in that job? For example, I worked at Electronic Arts, and one area you can't have a skill, one area you have to have an understanding of to be effective at that company is gaming. You have to understand how these games are made at Electronic Arts. So no matter what function you're in, you have to learn gameplay because it's embedded in everything that's talked about all day long at the company. And if you want to rise to the company, you have to be very conversant in gaming. If you're at Walmart, no matter what department you're in, you have to have an understanding of operations because it's a very operationally oriented company, supply chain logistics. So the one trick pony gets really good at something and moves up narrowly. And then at some point, they did not take lateral moves to broaden themselves and they hit a wall, they hit a ceiling. They don't get fired necessarily. They might just say, you're at your Shangri-La. So when I have people come to me and say, oh, I'll tell you a real example. I had somebody come to me, Debbie, and she ran creative services at a company I was at. And she said to me, she seemed kind of down. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, I didn't, my performance review. I said, well, I look at all the performance reviews. I know yours was good and I know the raise you got. And she said, well, it was more what was said about my future potential. I said, oh, what's that? And she said, I was told that you aren't going to make it to chief marketing officer from VP of creative services because I don't have a strategic orientation enough. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So basically, they said she didn't see the big picture. So I asked her if she set up an appointment and let's have lunch together. But we actually had lunch in my office. We drew on my whiteboard. I said, hey, let's draw Walmart's value chain together. So with a little help, I laid out with her sourcing, merchandising, operations, and store ops. This is the critical path at Walmart. Source the material, assortment planning and merchandising, it in store, supply chain, inbound, outbound logistics in the warehouse, and then the store operations inside the stores. Those four areas are the critical path of what you have to do at Walmart. So with Debbie, we sat here and we talked about these four critical areas of the business. And then underneath it, exactly what has to get done in those areas. So I said there's 6 areas that are really important to Walmart: supplier negotiation, assortment planning, being in stock with your products, understanding inbound and outbound logistics in the warehouse, merchandising action alley. Action alley is where people shop the most, and then making sure you manage the 600 associates that are in a Walmart. So we worked through this, and she couldn't fill this out on her own. I had to help her. But then I said, would you like to spend time with somebody in each of these 6 areas to broaden your aperture of the company? And she said, God, I'd love to. So I said, well, let's put that in your development plan. So over the next 6 or 8 months, she spent a day or so with these different groups in supply, in the buyers, with the merchants, with the merchandise planners, etc. And at the end of that time, she had a much more integrated, holistic view of how Walmart, of the value chain of Walmart, and how we create value to our customers and our shareholders. If you do that, if you understand the critical path that creates value in your company, I highly doubt you're going to be called non-strategic. So to me, this derailment tendency of being sort of lacking strategic orientation is something that many, many times you can learn. This is a problem, I think, a lot of times of access, of not being in this position where you see how the pieces fit together. And if you have a boss that'll help you develop, you can overcome this one, in my view. Okay, let me do one more and then we'll take another little break. So this is the last one on the derailment side. This is somebody, and this is the second biggest reason besides interpersonal issues that people derail. This is the whirling dervish who doesn't deliver on promises. Their brain is bigger than their stomach. Their mouth is bigger than their stomach. They say yes to too many things and they don't deliver. They have trouble in 4 different areas I found. One is they have trouble organizing, being a poor administrator and not having good planning skills on how they spend their time. That was the biggest part. Secondly, they have trouble prioritizing what's important. Third, many times they didn't understand process management, how the steps it took to get projects done and how long those steps took. They often misjudge how long it took to do things. They were too optimistic. And then lastly, many times, people that run into trouble on not delivering on promises, it's because they take on too much. They're pleasers who have trouble saying no to people. So if I would give you one remedy, if you know somebody that's like this, it's try really hard not to work in response mode so you're always on your heels at work. So I'd say 4 things. Do your hard work, your thinking work, when you're fresh, when you're inspired. I don't know when that time is for you. For me, it's early. I like to get in early and I like to do thinking work, early in the morning before the phone starts ringing and before, you get meetings. Secondly, batch your time as best you can. Try to stack meetings up and then have gaps for you to work. So, you have a meeting at 9, 9:30, and 10, and from 10:30 to 12:30, you do thinking work. Then you have a few more meetings, and then you have another block for thinking. Try as best you can to batch your time and work with your boss so you try to coordinate your times so that you're both having thinking work as much as possible at the same time. So you're not always in meetings. And third, try not to work in response mode. This thing that I'm holding up to my ear right now, this is the devil. Remember, your inbox represents somebody else's agenda. And you don't want to constantly be responding to digital interactions. So when you're doing the thinking work, put the phone away, turn off the notifications, and just do the thinking work. Pick up the phone, respond for 20 minutes or whatever, put the phone back down and think again. I see a lot of people who have trouble in this fifth derailment area because they're always in response mode and they're not proactive about time management. They're always reacting to other people's requests of them. And then lastly, prioritize and reprioritize your work almost every day. At the end of the day, I reprioritize based on what I learned for the next day and the next few days. And then I pretty much do that on a rolling basis all the time. And then ask yourself, is what I'm doing really moving the needle? So those are the 5 biggest reasons I found that good careers derail. Interpersonal issues led by low self-awareness, great individual contributors who have trouble transitioning into being managers, people that aren't staying curious, they get sort of comfortable in their careers and they don't maintain that learning growth mindset. Being too narrow and not broadening your horizons, probably 5 or so years into your career, you want to start broadening if you want to become more of a generalist. And then lastly, just not having good organizational and prioritization skills. And as a result, dropping balls and being seen as someone that you can't count on. Those are the biggest reasons. With that, Caitlin, I can take a few minutes before I flip the narrative and let's look for a few minutes at high potential high performers and what they do differently.
Great. So let's see, there's a couple that are kind of follow-up questions to some of these in particular. And one person was looking for a little bit more clarification on the association step of the discovery skills. Can you just describe that again a little bit more?
Sorry, the association step, what?
Of
Not
the
clear on it.
discovery skills?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things in discovery is trying to relax your constraints and trying to be open to how disparate things might connect together. This is probably the biggest challenge that creative people are usually good at is if you step way back and you try to stop thinking in a linear way and you look, are there ways, interesting combinations of how pieces might fit together that normally wouldn't to create new opportunities? Could you combine this service aspect with this product aspect? Are there different ways to look at a potential opportunity that are fresh by looking at connecting things that might not be super obvious in connecting? It's associative thinking, and it's Einstein said creativity is combinations, combinatorial playing with combinations to see if they might fit together in unique ways. It's a great question because it's very hard to sort of implicitly understand that.
Great. And then we talked a little bit about this earlier as far as like the personal derailments versus maybe a company caused or kind of industry related derailment. But from a personal lens, how can you think about those ones that are out of your control, that are derailments, but obviously not caused by these ones that you've listed as common derailers?
Well, I think if it's something that is it's outside of your power, um, in some strange way, you feel better because it wasn't something that you did. It was the ecosystem, the industry trend. You're a victim of circumstances. I think I would shift into um, is there a place that I can look at work where there are good growth trends and some tailwinds, and I can get a job in an industry where, it's not being downsized, it's experiencing sort of secular growth. So a lot of times I'll tell the Kellogg students, you know, figure out where are those growth businesses where, all tides are rising, all boats are rising with the rising tide. So where is the growth? Chase industries, go into businesses where there's nice natural tailwinds that you can take advantage of. That's what I would probably say if you experience something personally that had nothing to do with your competency or your skills. You're just the victim of circumstances. Can you go do something next where, there's good growth tailwinds that will help you? So, for example, I was in consumer packaged goods, which was growing like 1 or 2%. And I switched into software where the growth was very high in the 90s in gaming. And then I switched to internet, which was growing in the 2000s. So, how can you make some of these moves as you see a growth avenue emerging? Go with the growth is kind of what I'll say to Kellogg students.
Just quickly before we get off this,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Caitlin.
you hear now?
Try it again.
Hear me?
A little bit. You want to try talking? If not, I'll keep going. You're on mute now.
How's that?
Yes. Okay.
There's a question about like identifying your blind spots in this, which you talked about a little bit, but any quick tips on how to identify if you are landing in some of these derailers or self-awareness?
Now, I'm having trouble hearing you, but I did hear blind spots. So, I mean, it's a blind spot, so you're not going to recognize it. I just think that shows the importance of getting feedback. And a lot of times people won't give you honest and direct feedback unless they really believe you want it. So here's one thing I do. I'll say, David, can you give me feedback on how you think I handled that meeting? Now, his tendency might be, I don't want to make him feel bad. There's not, why would I do that? Or why would I be, he doesn't really understand he's doing this, but I'm not going to say it because, all it does is it makes it uncomfortable. So I will go one step farther and I'll say, David, I think, for example, I think I didn't have it. I didn't do a very good job of pulling out different opinions in there. What did you see? Now, because I was self-critical and fairly candid, that might open him up to saying things that he wouldn't have said before, and I might uncover a blind spot, an area that I wasn't aware of at all. So I do think people will start showing you a mirror, holding up a mirror, if you can signal to them that you're up for it, that you uh will respect what they're saying, and you genuinely are trying to improve. Okay, I'm going to get into the second part now. It's a lot shorter, but I didn't want to just write a book that was only about the bad, the hard stuff, the downer stuff. So I went out and I looked at what do high potential high performers do that we can all learn from. And the good news is it was pretty clear. One is they are more self-aware. They have higher levels of self-awareness than people who derail. And secondly, they have two competencies that they're generally good at. And I'll tell you those two in a second. So, self-awareness. This statistic just like blew me away when I was doing the research. People that have an inflated sense of their skill level and understate their interpersonal issues derail 6 times more than those with accurate self-awareness. They don't know what to work on, so they derail. They don't realize they're doing something. So The whole name of the game is self-awareness. This is a staggering statistic from Korn Ferry Voice. This is the Korn Ferry Voices survey. High potential high performers have greater self-knowledge. They know what they're good at, and they also know what they stink at. So here's an example. When high performers do a 360, they are closer to those who rate them than people that derail. So let's say a hypo in analytical skills, they give themselves a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being great. They give themselves a 3. The people that rate them, their boss, their peers, and their subordinates, will probably give them about a 3 too. Somebody who's going to derail gives them a 5 in themselves a 5 in analytical thinking, and their peers, their boss, and the subordinates give them a 2. So the gap that people that derail, the gap in that self-understanding is much greater than with high potential high performers. If they gave themselves a 4 on communication skills, chances are that everybody else is going to give them a 4 or 5. So they are closer in their self rating to those who rate them as well. They know what they're good at. They're real with themselves. And because of that, they know what they have to work on. They know what they have to focus on. And they know what they stink at. They know what they have to outsource and not do themselves. Second thing, there are two things consistently, two competencies consistently that high potential high performers had. So right here, I've combined two researchers took a look at, every company, many companies have lists of competencies they want you to develop, some usually between 8 and 12 competencies. So these researchers took a look at hundreds and hundreds of companies, and they found these 16 or 17 competencies on the right grouped against these 5 areas: character, interpersonal skills, drive, personal capability, and leading org change. Okay. Now, of these 17 different competencies on the right, like leads by example, etc., they found that high potential high performers shared 2 of these traits. In other words, they weren't good at everything. Matter of fact, there's a lot of things they weren't good at all, but they shared 2 that they were good at. What do you think they are? Any guesses? Caitlin, any guesses coming in over the wire?
Hopefully you're hearing me better now, but no, not that
Yes.
I'm seeing. Yes, and sorry
Great.
everyone for that. Oh, someone threw out communication, interpersonal skills, and character. Follow through on promises. Oh, we're kind of all over the board. Character, building strong. I mean, yeah, we're kind of all over there with them.
Okay,
All
here's what
right,
you
so
got.
don't leave us in the lurch. Yeah, what is it?
Here they are. Drive, focus, and drive for results. They high potential stay relentlessly focused on what matters. They keep their priorities visible. They evaluate new initiatives against their focused priorities, and they protect their resources and focus them on the things that matter. Number 1. Number 2, building strong relationships. They understand that business is a team sport and everyone has to row together. They build diverse and well-maintained social relationship structures. They invest in their relationships. They keep people appraised of how they're doing. They ask other people what they can do for them. They build social capital so that when they need it, they can utilize it. They don't do it in a Machiavellian way. But they have that drive and determination coupled with an ability to bring others along with them. That is the formula. If I would pick one more and make it 3, I would say under personal capability, they develop themselves. They are learners. They are always wanting to improve and learn. Here's some of the statistics that show this. This is a study that was done that rated what managers, a roll-up of 360s. This was the managers at 90th percentile of their company, the 90th percentile of their company. An average of 11 competencies were examined. And if the way this reads is, if a person had builds strong relationships as one of their competency areas, and that's the only one they had, 12% of those people that only had build strong relationships as one of their core competencies, if they only had that one, 12% of those people were considered in the 90th percentile of their company in overall effectiveness. Let's say that the only one that they had that they were high in was drive for results. If they had one competency and it was drive for results, 14% of those people were in the 90th percentile of their company in overall effectiveness. But look what happens if they have both of them. If they only have two competencies, but they are drive for results and build strong relationships, out of 11 average competencies, they only have two, but they have those two. 72% of those people were in the 90th percentile of their company in overall effectiveness. No other combination of these, no other combination came close to 72%. If you want to interview people to see if they're high potential, ask them questions that get at drive for results, building strong relationships, and being a learner. Those, to me, when I interview people now, I interview for those three areas. So dipping into the hypo playbook, stay focused, make those commitments visible, and even have to, if you're going to have to change, renegotiate so you can protect the things that are important. That's that focus on drive for results. Seek feedback always so you can make adjustments to your style or make adjustments to the projects you're working on early on so you don't get sort of caught off guard later. And third, have that growth mindset. Be curious. Don't ask about your next promotion. Ask about the next skills you need to develop. So you're being sort of skill oriented because the promotions will come as the skills come. That is a 50-minute look at my book. So, final slide, capable people, talented people, they derail because they have blind spots and don't understand their gap areas. It's not that they're not talented, it's that they're not self-aware. People with the right stuff, hypos, seek feedback so they lower their blind spots. And that self-awareness allows them to grow and develop and become high potential, high performers. Here's an eye chart of the book. And with that, we have a couple of minutes only, but is there any last question or any last question, Caitlin, that you'd like to ask me?
Trying to decide that we have a few questions that we didn't get to, so I'm trying to see if there's one that's a little bit more general. One that came in earlier was if you have any thoughts on what a better way to deal with stressful situations is. So, do those tendencies exist from our basic human tendency to seek pleasures and avoid pain and have a fear of performance failures or reputational damage? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, that's such a good question. We could talk about this so much. Um, I am a huge fan of two areas for stress management. Well, three really. One is getting outside and getting your heart rate up, exercising. The natural world is wonderful. So get outside, get the sun on your face, get your heart rate up and walk. That is dopamine, serotonin, that is just so important. Second, if you don't have some sort of a mindfulness practice, it's really important, whatever form it is, meditation, breathing, relaxed breathing, something that allows you to clear your mind and sort of lower the temperature inside your brain, let your prefrontal cortex fire, have your amygdala kind of calm down. Any mindfulness practice is great for stress alleviation. Third is, if I say a third one, it's I try to work on what I call, I think it's reframing. So it's basically cognitive behavioral therapy. If I have a negative view on something and I'm caught up in a spin cycle of negativity, I try to pull back and see how challenge the assumptions my brain is operating under and try to reframe the situation in a more positive light. So I highly recommend Adler and Beck, Aaron Beck, books on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's basically reframing negativity a lot of times, getting rid of an erroneous view that you have, and casting things in a more accurate or positive light. So those would be the three I would say.
Those are great. I think that's a great way to wrap it up and hopefully some good words of wisdoms for folks to leave as they depart today. But thank you so much to everyone for joining us. And thank you again to you, Professor Cast, for the wonderful presentation. As a reminder, the recording is going to be shared in the next day or two with everyone who is registered. And to find out more about alumni events, please check out the NAA website at alumni.northwestern.edu. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and go Cats.
Go Cats. Thank you all.